want to tell you about my two youngest kids. As you know, I have three kids, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And my youngest two are very, very jealous of the attention that the other one gets. So much so that I have told people who really want to hold my super cute 1-year-old baby girl that the key to getting to hold her is actually to hold my 2-year-old, and then the jealousy will become so bad that she will beg you to pick her up, all right? At home, if one is sitting in mom's lap, the other one will just come up and go, ah! In which the one in the lap, wanting to fend off the one that is screaming, will return the scream. And so we will have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old just screaming at the top of their lungs at each other. That is how bad the jealousy is in our house. See, we all know that jealousy can be a pretty ugly thing, right? I mean, we have seen it. We have probably even struggled with it before. Have you ever struggled with jealousy? I'll be the first one to say, I have. I've struggled with jealousy, and we can see just how ugly it can be, that we're jealous of someone's success. We're jealous of a relationship that they have that we wish that we had, or maybe it's just stuff. Like, I wish I had their stuff, and just because we're jealous, it leads us to do silly, sinful things. I'll never forget, some memories are just burned into your head, and you just have no reason why. I'll never forget one time I had a friend come visit me after he moved away, and so he drove for hours to come visit, and this is, I was probably 12 or 13, and we were both really into wrestling, okay? Not like wrestling each other, but wrestling action figures, okay? And so he brought all of his wrestling action figures, and he had the one that I wanted, and I was very jealous of it. And so when it was time for him to leave and we were picking up all the toys, I just kicked that one under my bed. And he left without it. Of course, then my conscience got to me, and I had to tell my mom, hey, we need to spend $10 mailing this thing back to him, right? And so jealousy can cause us to do some really, really crazy things. But the biggest thing that it does is it causes us to miss out on what God is doing in our own life. That we're so concerned about what God is doing in other people's lives that we totally miss out on what God is doing in our life. So jealousy is to be avoided, right? So why in Exodus 20, verse 4, why does it say this? And just to kind of give you some context, this is the second of the 10 commandments. It says, do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or in the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow and worship to them, and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. What? Is God sinning and admitting it? The truth is, there is good and bad jealousy. See, bad jealousy is what causes you to kick a wrestling action figure under your bed. And it's what we think of when we hear the word jealousy, right? Like when we think of jealousy, we think of that terrible, negative thing. It's really about us coveting what other people have, us being envious about what they have. Here's another way to describe jealousy. Jealousy is telling God, you gave them fill in the blank, and you should have given it to me. I'm mad at you for not doing what you should have done in my life. Now, that's kind of a harsh way to phrase it, and we would probably never say that to God, but that's the truth, right? Jealousy is us being angry at God that he is not being our personal genie. So jealousy can be a very, very bad thing. But there's also a good jealousy. Matter of fact, we actually see it in the scripture. The Apostle Paul, he actually writes to a church that he founded, and they are starting to slip into some false teaching, and this is what he writes to them. He says, I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. Okay? So he's recognizing that there is this propensity to always view jealousy as negative. He says, I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy because I have promised you in marriage to one husband to present a pure virgin to Christ. See, there is a godly jealousy, and here's a great illustration of it. Marriage. It is good and right for a husband to be jealous if another man comes in and flirts with his wife. That is his right and his alone. It is good and right for a wife to be jealous if an old high school flame pops up on Facebook and starts telling your husband how handsome he looks, because that is her right alone. That is good, godly jealousy. So good jealousy is being jealous for something that you rightfully deserve. Bad jealousy is being envious or jealous for something that you do not rightfully own, that you do not deserve, that God has not given you. So when we see that God is jealous, we see that God is desiring something that is rightfully his. Our love, our service, our worship. So when God says, going back to verse 4, do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above or in the earth below or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow to worship them and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. He is acknowledging the fact that our worship and our service belong to him as both our creator, okay? He created us to be in a relationship with him, to worship him. But then he owns us double because he also died on the cross to save us. And so he owns us double. Therefore, our worship and our service belong to him 2 times over. Now, if you've been with this series all series long, or maybe you were just here last week, you're probably looking down at Exodus chapter 20, and honestly, Andy is probably in the back of the room going, Exodus chapter 20. I'm pretty sure we were in Exodus chapter 4 last week, and Moses was about to go rescue the people in Egypt, and now all of a sudden, Stephen is talking about the 10 commands, okay? Did Stephen really just, totally skip over all that stuff? Well, no. We're going to get back to it, but the reason why I think it's so important to start with this is because we have to remember that the 10 Commandments didn't happen in a vacuum, okay? A lot of times we see a picture of the 10 Commandments or a print off of the 10 Commandments, and we just kind of think of them as like a rule list that is put up somewhere in a school, right? Something that should just be taught, and they're totally isolated from what actually went on in the biblical narrative. Well, where they are given is they are given to God's people that he rescued, that he pulled out of slavery. So if we go back 2 verses, okay, we're still in Exodus 20, and we go back to verse 2, this is how God starts those 10 commandments. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Then he gives the first command, do not have other gods besides me. Yes, God with these 10 commandments, he's laying down the most basic societal rules and moral laws for the people to follow. But before he does that, I want you to see this. He reminds them of who he is. Okay, I am the Lord your God. What he can do, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, and then who they are, out of your place of slavery. You were slaves, but now you're free. And so as we go back and we look at that actual moment of rescue, We have to keep this in mind because here's exactly what God is going to do through what we call the 10 plagues. He's going to show them who he is, what he can do, and who they are. Because you've got to remember, they've been slaves for a long, long time. Over 400 years. Now, when we talk about big numbers like that, like anytime a number goes outside of our own lifespan, we can't understand it, right? But let me help you by putting it in a bit of context. We just celebrated the nation's birthday, okay? It was its 245th birthday. So if the founding fathers were the first generation enslaved in Egypt, we would still have 155 years to go of slavery. Almost double the length of our nation. These people have been slaves in Egypt. It's all they know. This is their mindset. Has God abandoned them? Is God incapable of rescuing them? Is this all we are now? We had these grand promises from God that we were going to be given a land, and we were going to be made a people, and that our nation was going to thrive and it was going to bless the earth. But now all we are slaves to a foreign power. So God has to step in, not just to physically free them, but to free them from the mindset by reminding who he is, what he can do, and who they truly are. So, as we talk about these 10 commandments, God is not randomly pulling out of a hat disasters, okay? He doesn't have a whole bunch of disasters in a hat and he's shaking it up. He's like, okay, first disaster is, he's not doing that. What God is doing is he is actually using very specific things that is going to target the very psyche of Egypt in order to make them release the Israelites. And he is pinpoint targeting gods in the Egyptian pantheon. God is going to show not only who he is, but how false the gods are that the Egyptians worship and that the Israelites have been hearing about for 400 years. So, here's the setup. Let's travel back to Exodus chapter 6. Here's the setup that we get of the rescue from Egypt, the 10 plagues. Exodus 6, verse 2. It says, "Then God spoke to Moses, telling him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but I was not known to them by the name the Lord. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land they lived in as aliens. Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are forcing to work as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant." Okay? He's telling Moses, look, I remember all of this. There is this relationship. This is who you are. This is who I am. And then he's about to say, okay, here's what I am going to do. Verse 6, therefore, okay? Because of all this history, because of the promise that I have made, therefore tell the Israelites, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from the forced labor of the Egyptians and rescue you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and great acts of judgment. Okay, that is what I will do. I will take you as my people. That is who you are, and I will be your God. That is who I am. You will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the forced labor of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land that I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. Moses told this to the Israelites, but they did not listen because of their broken spirit and hard labor. They were slaves. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go from this land. Now, the 10 plagues starts here and goes all the way through Exodus chapter 12. Buckle in because we're going to read it all. No, we're not. We're not going to read it all, okay? I want to give you the big picture, okay? I would encourage you to go back and read it this afternoon. And what I'm going to do is this week, I'm actually going to produce some videos that actually go into more depth what we're about to talk about. So make sure that you watch out for that. It will be in the email on Thursday. But I want to give you an overview of what God was doing through these 10 plagues. Okay, the first plague was this. It was turning the Nile to blood. Moses goes before Pharaoh. First plague happens. God turns the Nile to blood. Pharaoh's magicians come in. They use their dark magic. They do the same thing, okay? They also turn the Nile to blood. Now, this was very vital to Egypt, even to this day, economically, right? The Nile is Egypt. Right now, 92% of Egypt's population live on or near the Nile River, okay? It is the only part of Egypt that is habitable, okay? If you look at a night satellite picture, you can see the Nile because there are lights all down it and there are no lights anywhere else in Egypt. See, they had multiple gods who protected the Nile and regulated the Nile. Even the seasons of Egypt all related to the Nile. And God's going, you know what? I can take it away like that. Caused it to turn to blood, killed the fish. His first plague devastated Egypt. Then the second plague, frogs. Now, this one, when you get to this one, you kind of like, frogs? Really, God? A plague of frogs. Like, that one seems silly, right? But it was actually extremely targeted. See, in Egypt, frogs were very sacred, and they were the symbol of fertility, and no frogs were to die, okay? If you saw a frog, it was to be prized, and they even had 2 gods that were shaped like frogs. And so God's like, hey, you like frogs? How about all the frogs? And it says that there are frogs everywhere, okay? They can't go to bed because they got to get the frogs out of the bed, okay? They can't cook because the frogs are jumping out of the oven, okay? I mean, just frogs everywhere. And then the crazy part is not just that he gave them a plague of frogs. He actually says very specifically in the book of Exodus that in the ultimate, if I may, troll move of God, he just kills them all. So all of a sudden, all these frogs are going crazy, and all of a sudden he kills them all. So much so that they're starting to rot everywhere, and they're having to heap up giant piles of frogs all over Egypt. This thing that was considered so sacred, they were shoveling them out of their house. Next one. Third plague is gnats. There was Geb, the god of the earth, okay, the god of the ground, if you will, that term, earth. And so Moses, he strikes the ground, the dust turns to gnats everywhere. And this is actually the first plague that could not be duplicated by Pharaoh's magicians. And they exclaim, this is the finger of God. We can't match this. And it's right here that after the magicians tell Pharaoh, hey, we weren't able to do this one. It's right here that God begins to make a distinction. See, the first 3 plagues also affected God's people. But it's the 4th plague and on that only affect the Egyptians. See, God was showing his power to everyone at the beginning when the plagues were pretty mild. And now that it's on record that these miracles can't be matched, he's going, okay, my people, you're safe. Number 4, here it comes, flies. How many of you feel like you're in a plague of flies right now? Okay, yes, okay. I'm glad I'm not the only one, all right? Now, this is the first one that had overt destruction all throughout the land. Flies were going everywhere. They were eating things, and they were doing all of this. And this was targeted towards one of the gods of creation in the Egyptian pantheon, the fly god of creation. Then he goes on to the fifth, turns it up even more. Okay, this is death of livestock. Okay, this is devastating to the economy. Okay, can you imagine? Your primary economics are agriculture and ranching, and plague number 5 completely takes out all the livestock, just dead. Your nation is crumbling. I mean, it was annoying at the beginning. Now, things are serious. There were actually multiple gods with longhorns. They would fit really well around here. And so these are targeting multiple gods. And then number 6, this is the first plague that directly affects humans. Boils break out all over people. Even the magicians specifically it says in the scripture, the magicians are so overcome with boils, they can't actually come to the Pharaoh's court to tell him that they can't do this. They just kind of send word to him, hey, can't do this. Send help. Targeting gods of healing, targeting gods of protection. Number 7, a plague of hail. An intense storm comes, destroys homes, destroys crops. So now the Nile has been destroyed. The livestock has been destroyed. Now hail comes and beats all the crops that are in the fields, going directly against the sky gods and the agricultural gods. And if that wasn't enough, number 8, God sends locusts like had never been seen before, and they eat all the crops that still remained. Locusts were so feared by the Egyptians that there was actually a god whose only job was to keep locusts away. God's going, he can't do anything. Number 9, darkness. It's one thing when you can see destruction going on. It's another thing when you can't see anything going on. Have you ever been in absolute darkness? You ever been like on a cave tour and then they turn off the lights and it's so dark that you can feel it? That's what God does. It says for 3 days, no one did anything because of the darkness. This was God pointing directly to the sun god, saying, he can't save you either. And then the final plague, and we're barely going to touch on it because Andy is going to talk about it in much more detail next week, the death of the firstborn. This one was targeted at Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh presented himself as a god and his lineage as a procession of gods. And this is God saying, your own king can't even protect his house. And if he can't protect what's going on in his own house, he certainly isn't protecting you. And so God takes out Egyptian firstborns, devastating families, to show who he is, what he can do, and who his people are. Because this plague right here could be avoided by a simple act of faith. By sacrificing an animal and putting its blood on the doorpost. People had to say, God, I believe you, in order to avoid this one. Next week, we're going to talk about this specific thing and actually what great festival and event came out of this plague and how it affects us and how it leads and points to Jesus. I cannot wait. But again, if you want to see more about these 10 plagues, this week we'll be releasing more. We'll talk about specifically who the gods were, and we'll be talking about, hey, is there any evidence outside the Bible of these plagues? And so we'll talk about that. So watch out for that in the email if you're a nerd like me and just love getting into the nitty-gritty, okay? But God here, he's showing them that he rightfully deserves their worship. That's what all this was about. Let my people go so they can go and worship me. So it's this action where God shows his might and his power and his ability to rescue that sets up the 10 Commandments, that sets up all of Israel and all of the scripture beyond this. So let's read it again with this in mind. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Now, because I did all of that, don't have any other gods beside me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above or in the earth below or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow and worship to them and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Remember our history together. So I want to wrap up with this question. Where do you run for protection? This message is a pretty serious message, pretty serious moment in history. But let's bring it home. Where do you run for protection? Now, you and I, we don't run to lowercase g gods anymore. We don't run to Ra or Geb or any of the Egyptian gods because we're modern and sophisticated. See, our gods, they're still there. They're just much more well hidden. So when things go south, where do you run for protection? Where do you go for comfort? Do you run to the TV to zone out? Do you run to your money? You check your bank balance on your phone. Whew, okay, still got money in there. Things are okay. Do you run to a sports team? Hey, as long as they're doing okay, I'm doing okay. Do you run to a politician that he is our hope or she is our hope? Do we run to social media? Well, things are crashing down all around me in life, but if I can project a good image and get people to like it, then everything will be okay. Where do you run for protection? Is God who you run to? Because we see that God is not afraid to go after the worship that he deserves. He's not afraid to remind us who he is, what he can do, and who we are. So let's give God what rightfully belongs to him, our worship and our service. Earlier, we sang a song, and the opening line was, he is jealous for me. And I don't know, maybe you have thought about that song before and you understand and kind of wrestled with, okay, God is jealous because he rightfully deserves our worship. Or maybe every time you sang it, you were just like, is God like a bad boyfriend? Okay, like what's going on there? Our worship is what God deserves. Our life is what God deserves. That's what Paul said in Romans, okay? He says that the living of our life is the sacrifice that God demands, okay? It is our form of worship that he desires. So as we sing this song, as we celebrate who God is, and as we acknowledge that he deserves everything that we have, may we have hearts that say, God, it is all for you.